Hello. Welcome
How's
to
it
Winner
going so
Find a
far?
Way show with Trent Clark. I am your host and super excited to have you here today. We've had all sorts of technical challenges to get me and Mike going today, but I'm super pumped up to have Mike Kaeding, the CEO of Norhart, on our show today. Mike, how you doing, buddy?
Doing well. How are you doing?
I'm jangled, but I'm good. It's been an interesting day in Michigan where we've lost power. We've had just it's issue after issue, and so but thrilled to be sitting down with you for a minute and talking about winners find a way. And for those who are joining us for the first time, if you've never tuned into the show, I, as your host, am a three-time World Series coach and CEO of two brands of leadershipity and athletic influencer marketing. My guests talk about their challenges as they've built their brands and built their organizations up, and how they face those challenges and how they found a way to win. So let's dive into your life a little bit, Mike, and a little bit of Norhart, which is a real estate firm. Is that right?
That's right. We design, build, and rent apartments, but really focused on driving down the cost of housing. Imagine someday if your rent could be half, if your mortgage payment could be half, and that's what we're shooting to do.
Yeah, I think it's really unique, holistic approach that you've taken. And by the way, your whole vibe says tech to me. You look like you're the technical genius. And by the way, I think there's some merit to this because your background is computer science, accounting, engineering. I mean, talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was very passionate going off to college to learn more about computer science, mathematics, management, and other things. And I knew I always wanted to make some kind of impact in the world. And so I thought originally that would be related to virtual reality and special effects and movies and that sort of thing. And so that's what drew me into that space at the University of Minnesota.
It's not too late. I'm sure down the road we're going to have this big effect of like how we change and watch movies. But first, what you're going to do is you're going to make housing affordable in a very different way.
Mm,
This is not a government program, affordable
yeah.
housing. This is a holistic approach to bringing in from site selection to materials to a very uh, key element of people that you've brought into this that are really game changing. So talk us through that about your vision on this, Mike.
Mm. Yeah. When you look at construction over the past 60 years, you haven't really seen much improvement. It's only been about 10%. But when you look at other industries like manufacturing, they've seen improvement of 760%. Or
Wow.
agriculture, it was 1,500%. Like, what are we doing? This is crazy. Why is this industry so stuck in its ways? Well, it turns out there's a lot of reasons. But fundamentally, we're just looking at other industries like manufacturing and agriculture, applying those techniques into construction to drive down the cost of housing. I mean,
Yes.
if we were okay with the level of improvement in construction and tech, we would still be carrying around $15,000 giant brick cell phones, right?
Yeah.
We just aren't okay with that.
We're
Why do we
talking like
accept
this,
that?
right? That cell phone, like I had one of those. Like I remember back in my first years in baseball, like they had the brick phone. Remember those?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Like, why are we okay with that in our market? And if you look over the past few decades, the cost of housing is rising faster than even our incomes. And so, when I look at the kind of impact we can have in the world, driving down that cost in a meaningful way, hopefully positively impact all of our lives. And that's our dream.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you talk about it, Mike, because I used to own a shipping business,
Oh, wow.
Chicago Maritime Asset Management, and we did a lot of shipping contract work and a lot of management of vessels. And man, there was this massive shift in the industry as you saw technology come in. I mean, literally, right? Like 2,500, 3,000-year-old business of like shipping. And you read even in biblically, you read people taking soundings in the Bible of like, what's our depth, right? And now here you go, 2,500, and we have GPS, cellular phone system, satellite phone systems. I mean, all these components now have been brought into the vessels, which you know was a blessing and a curse. There's all these values of it. Of course, it changed everything for the workers who all of a sudden had to have some technical savvy. And it also changed the time on the vessel of, hey, I could go to my bunk and watch my iPad and catch up on my shows. And I mean, you can imagine life on a vessel out in the middle of nowhere. 50 years ago, this was not technically driven very well, except by some navigation tools. So that was about it, right?
I love that example because it shows how just applying those techniques to that ancient industry radically improved all of our lives, right? Because now you have all this international trade that can happen to improve what we all experience.
Well, I don't know if it always improved the social lives of the people on the vessels. Like
Sure,
I can
that's
remember,
true.
yeah, I can remember being in this pretty early when vessels used to go up what we call brown water through the river system, which you're a part of.
Interesting.
You're at the end of that, right? In
Yeah.
Minnesota,
Yep.
the mighty Mississippi, and which really originates in your town, really. I mean, that's kind of how the Mississippi goes.
Yeah.
And you have these towns like Memphis. Well, these navigators were just amazing with these barge vessels, and they would just pop those right up on the shoreline, and everyone hops off up into town, and hey, let's go get some barbecue in Memphis and hear some music, and maybe we'll meet some people, right? And man, now that vessel stops, the client's calling, what's happening to my product, why is it slowed? We're
Mm.
expecting an ETA of 41 hours and 12 minutes from now. Why would that change? And so, all of a sudden, there was no autonomy. Everyone's very watched very closely, if that's fair.
Oh, sure. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. So now you go through this. Your family has been in this real estate business, multifamily housing, and you're going to go to universities to study computer engineering, accounting. I mean, you're a math guy, and talk to me. What was the family's reaction to that? Did they were like, "Oh yeah, go for it, Mike. It's gonna be awesome," or were they like, "What are you doing? Like, we need you to understand real estate."
Yeah, my parents started this, it was very small family business and grew it over time. And so I remember growing up with it, where family outings were like us running off to the hardware store a half an hour away, filling up 8 shopping carts full of building materials, putting it on my dad's little trailer, stacking it to the sky as we're like cruising down the highway. So I lived it very much growing up. But I went off to college wanting to do my own thing. And my dad really wanted me to join the business, but I struggled with that ultimately because I didn't want people to think it was given to me. Right. So I had to
Mm,
wrestle through my own ego in that regard. But once I got past that, I realized deep down I wanted to have some kind of meaningful, positive impact on the world. And I said, why not take this opportunity, the small business at the time, and grow it to something that can actually have that kind of impact? So we jumped into it. My dad and I worked on it for a while together, and then it wasn't long after my dad he passed away,
mm,
and that was a tough experience because one day he was basically here, the next day he wasn't,
mm.
and
Sudden.
yeah, and if I'm very honest, I didn't really know what I was doing in this space, but looking back at it, that was almost sort of the magic because we could start asking questions. We didn't know the way things were supposed to be done. And so we started like, why are we doing it this way? Should we change it to that way? I had no one to tell me no.
Mm.
And so we then started down this journey of changing the way construction is done. And we were given that freedom and curiosity and ability to do so. Now it's a rocky road for sure, but that's how things started.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, like the freedom in that, right?
Mm,
The self-described. We started asking questions, and we knew we didn't have the buck stops with the honcho, right? Like we don't have the answers anymore, and you're still a guy who's learning the business, even though you've been around it your whole life. You're coming out of school with a pretty good focus on mathematics, and but where do you think um that exploration value came for you? I mean, is that something you learned at school, or has this always been hey, you were a lover of Curious George and you just rolled with it?
I've always been a very like curious person. I've always loved to learn. That's why I had so many things I was doing in college. But there was also points in the business that kind of forced us to learn. I remember early on, we were building an apartment building, and the plumbing contractor came to us and said, "Mike, we're going to triple your bid for the next project. Same size, same basic building, tripling the price of that. Like, I just can't afford it." And so we reached out to other plumbers. No one was interested, and they're all very expensive. So we said, "Well, can we learn how to do this?" And we were kind of forced into it. So we bought a bunch of books, started studying how to do plumbing. We were able to find a subcontractor that was willing to kind of partner with us to help us learn. That was a disaster originally because we really didn't know what we were doing. But diving into that and getting our feet dirty and just learning and pressing through all of that got us to a much better spot later on.
Mm, that's powerful. Yeah,
Mm.
I think that a lot of folks have that forced exploration, whether you want it or not, right? I recall one time in my business where I was just, learning QuickBooks. I'm not an accountant, my father was, but now I'm in this bookkeeper mode, and I've got to do all this programming and balancing everything. And man, I spent countless hours on it till finally I got wise and hired someone in who was really an expert. And you know the lesson was huge for me because
Oh, yeah.
I used to spend 9:30 at night after I put my kids to sleep till 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, get up at 5:30, get going and build the business the next day. And this was a regular 5, 6 day thing. And I was losing time with family, fatigue. I solved it all for less than $100 a month by hiring a
Wow.
bookkeeper, right?
Yeah.
But the value was because I did that, there was never anything my bookkeeper surprised me with. I knew all the things that she knew, now, at least the language, but I was now getting it from a perspective of, hey, I've noticed, and she can do it just so much more efficiently than I could. And what a great lesson that was. And really was forced to like, wow, I'd like to stay married, so I should hire this bookkeeper.
I
Now,
love that. Yeah. And
now
we have a
one
lot
thing,
of experiences like that as well. I remember early on we would hire on temp workers, and that created this terrible, it just, we weren't functioning well. And there was someone much smarter who came to me and said, "Mike, you idiot. Like, what are you doing here? Like, you need to think about this differently." And he really shifted our view to focusing on hiring the world's best people. And so we started doing that. We started fighting to find the very best people in the world, to the point now that we fly people in from other states into Minnesota to work every week, or we have an international staff all across the globe that work with us now. And what that opened up, what I found is that the best people solve problems that open doors that you didn't know could be opened. And we
yes.
also found that the best people outperform average people by 2, 3, 5, even 10 times as much. And so having that caliber of team behind you, it just opens the world up. And that's been probably the most important lesson that we've learned.
Yeah, what a valuable lesson, Mike. I mean, when we talk about winners find a way, that was built on the premise that it was a quote from a book in the Four Disciplines of Execution. It says, "Winners, when shown data that they are losing, find a way to win." And I do this
Mm.
bit for my LinkedIn and my YouTube channel called "The Best in the World," and we talk about what the best in the world do. The best in the world have things that others, and people are always astounded meet, and you're in the hockey state. So when you meet someone who's a really high level high school Minnesota hockey player, and then they go on to maybe even a minor league career, and you think, wow, this player looks like Gretzky to me, and then you realize that they can't compete with that next level up. Like it's a whole nother level of people that are literally 2, 3x better than they are. And you're like going, wow, if I take the best in the world to the average, it is like 8, 10x because they're so
Absolutely.
highly skilled. So you've carved your ability, and this is part of Mike's holistic approach, right? He's carved his ability to create this value by bringing the best of the world, who, when you have the best in the world around you, they create that same uh, X amount of value, right? So it's like, ooh, we're getting X amount ROI on these folks too. We're paying them handsome. but
Yep.
they bring a return of 10, 20, 50x to what I have to pay them.
Yeah, people think that the best people are expensive. And if you look at the budget, yes, they are per person. But when you look at it compared to what they're producing, they're actually the most inexpensive people that you can hire. It's a absolutely no brainer. I can't believe more business owners don't really understand that principle,
Well, it's
but
that
it
big
changes the
investment.
game.
It's the big investment front, right? It's
Yeah.
that big investment, like going, hey, if you don't have that proof that they're going to do that,
Mm.
then you're not sure. And one of the things we used to do in my EO forum years ago was we had a measurement, a KPI in our businesses of revenue per employee. Right. And I remember I was so enamored by one of my fellow folks in EO who had a $16 million revenue company with 8 employees.
Wow.
And I'm like, what? You're getting like $2 million in revenue per employee? Like, who are these people? Like, I gotta meet these 8 people, like it was just it was just such a staggering statistic to me. And so, like you're saying, like, hey, listen, I could hire the average and I could pay them $100,000 in the hopes that I could get $200,000 of value per employee. But all of a sudden I hire the best in the world and I've got 10 employees pumping out, 500,000 or $1 million per employee. It's no joke on the returns on that. There's a lot of margin in that game.
Absolutely. And I've seen it over and over and over again. But the numbers that you're saying are very consistent with the numbers that we see. It
Yeah.
can be that $1 million level for an employee that may cost you 2 or 300,000.
Yeah, and I wonder how many folks who have, been in the seat like, hey, I want to be impactful, I want to be a major contributor. Man, can you imagine if I come into you as an interviewee, Mike, and say, hey, Mike, listen, I'm pretty assured I can bring you a value of $1.5 million to our top line annually. And you're like, how much do I have to pay you? like, hey, $250,000. And you're like, yep, worth it, right?
And you know
Because
what's
you've done the
amazing?
numbers.
Yeah. And what's amazing too is like all these like people problems and stuff you have within your business, there's still people problems, but a lot of it starts going away. And you get to work and you're having so much fun because the people around you are pushing you to be better rather than the leader pushing everyone else to step it up.
Yeah, and I never thought about how lucky I was in pro sports to have that,
Mm.
right? We're
Yeah.
all working to be champions. Everybody wants the ring, right? And so you're like, hey man, what can we do to bring the Twins to the top team in the world? And you're all gunning for this because the nice thing about building unity is that we do all want the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And so if we really get that message, and I love your message, right? You bring these all stars in and say, hey, we're impactful game changers. We're gonna change the world by creating this holistic view of how we do real estate, and we're gonna bring all these lessons from these other industries. And if you've got experience in those to bring in what you've done in change in engineering, in farming, in mechanical, in production, in publication, like let's talk about that because we're whiteboarding it all to figure out how streamlined can we be for continuous improvement. Is that fair?
Oh, it's totally fair. That's what we experience. We're pushing for that kind of level. And it's amazing the result that happens after pushing that into that space.
Yeah. Well, and I think the results happen for a lot of organizations, in my experience, if the full body is moving towards
Oh yeah.
a center, a center and a North Star. And I'm always shocked by how many organizations I go in and say, hey, what's the North Star? What is the goal of everyone in this organization? Does every person in this organization know how they contribute to making lower cost, affordable level quality housing for the world?
Oh, that's so good. That's so true for our organization too. Like we have a very clear, like 10-word purpose, a very
Yeah.
clear mission, a very clear set of values, just 5 values. But even our strategies, we have just 3 strategies. There's only 3 things that we're focusing on as a business, but narrowing those down, spelling them out, and then we have orientation, we have follow-up orientation, we have exercises, things that get everyone aligned to that core mission, when you have that and everyone's rowing in the same direction, it is amazing. It is so much fun.
Yeah, and I think there's another side of this too. I really feel like organizations have to be focused on our end result, the end user,
Mm.
because I want for Norhart, I want the person who comes in to clean your offices to understand her contribution to providing for a single mother of a few children who is very strict on a budget, who wants a quality, safe neighborhood, who can now do that because her company that she takes care of and provides for all these people to have a good workspace every day to come in, she provides that. Like she
Mm.
is contributing to that every single day. And I want her to go home and be proud of that work.
Oh, so true. That's exactly how we live things out. And that's so right. I love it.
Yeah. And so let's talk, one thing, one thing I love about you, man. Here's one thing most people don't know about Mike Kaeding, right? Um, your free time is about physics, man. You're like a physics junkie. Like you're hanging out, like picking out the old lectures of the top professors in the country on physics and listening to them go deep about this world. What actually involves in this whole universe? And do you think that's because you've got this vision of how it all ties together, how it all comes together, because it's more than just me, it's more than just us. There's a lot of factors that are coming in. What do you think that curiosity stems from?
Boy, yeah, I love understanding anything that is different than you might expect it to be. And so if you look at the world around us, it's very normal. This is our
Yeah,
experience. This is how we see the world. But
yeah,
if you look at things at a deeper level, where science is taking things with physics, quantum mechanics, general theory of relativity, there are crazy things that are
yeah,
not evident to us. One
yeah,
really simple one is that time can actually change depending on the speed that you go. And so the GPS system has to make adjustments for that fact. If it
yeah,
didn't, then your watch, your cell phone would be off by meters every single day.
yeah. Well, two things that remind me of that is one, I'm the constant competitor, right? So the moment I get in my car and I've got a 2 hour drive and it tells me I'm going to be there at, 3:15 this afternoon, I'm like, how am I going to get there at 3:10, right? Like, how am I going to beat the GPS, right? So, and inevitably it's very good. And I was always impressed with what's the other GPS coordinate system. It's not Google Map, but it's the other one, Waze.
Oh
When
yeah.
I lived in Chicago, Waze was just incredible. I would literally put it on my phone, and it would tell me like you're gonna arrive at 4:17, and I'm like, oh my God. I mean, I could bank on that within 2 minutes. And in
Wow.
Chicago, you never know what you're gonna get. So I became so impressed with that algorithm. The other, physics one that really I loved was um I was down in Ecuador, in the Mitra del
Mm.
Mundo, the middle of the world. And, these French scientists, and they all got together down in Ecuador, and they're creating like the equator and where everything's at. And they pinpoint the middle of the world, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And this is like I think it was like the 1500s. It was crazy how long ago, right? Well, it turns off that they're like 19 feet off, right? It's like I'm like,
Pretty amazing.
yeah, like this is like 500 years ago. They were 19 feet off. Like they had none of the tools that we have now. And everyone's like, yeah, yeah. Well, the middle of the world's actually right over there. They screwed it up. And I'm like they screwed it up. Are you serious? Like they had this big blue ball. People didn't have transportation. I mean, put yourself in their shoes for a second of what they're dealing with. And it was just, it was incredible to think like the math, the calculations, the
Oh yeah.
figures that everyone had to come in to go, hey, this is the middle of the earth right here. And you're like, what? Like, equator. What does that mean? The sun's, and I was, another physics things that I really loved when I was there
Mm.
was if you and I were out and we came out of a meeting or something like that and we walked out on the street, you could go to a vendor and say, hey, do you know what time it is? And they would look up, see the sun, and go, oh, it's 11:05 a.m. And because the sun never changes, right? At the
Yeah.
equator, it's always the same. Like there's literally a 2 minute gap in the entire year of change. So everyone in the country can look at the sun and know exactly the shadow and know exactly what time it
Amazing. That's so cool that they can do that.
is. Isn't that cool? Yeah, I love that. I was just like, that's so weird. They didn't. I'm waiting for them to look at their phone, look at their watch. No, we're going off shadows. So walk me through. I know, like, walk me through this what big challenge you faced. I want you to walk me through a time when you've had a challenge. Um we've all faced times we're losing, and I can, offline we talked a little bit about a story where your father's passed recently. Now you're up to the, one of the biggest city buildings you've ever done. Inspection crews like, shut it down. The rookie doesn't know. Not going to happen. I'm sure investments have been made. Banks are saying, "Where's our money?" Right? Because as soon as they give it to you, they're asking, right? And so, walk us through that.
Yeah, not long after my dad passed, we're building a mid-sized building. I think it was just 30 units at the time. And the city was very unsure with my credentials and what I could do. And I mean, rightfully so. I didn't have those credentials. So they looked at our project and actually shut us down and said, Mike, you need to find real leadership and management to come in here and do this project. No. We worked frantically over a short period of time to find someone to kind of fill that role. It turned out to not be what we needed, very ineffective at his role, but at least it codified the city enough at that time. And then we just worked our tail off to do what we needed to do to produce the right quality building. And I remember just a few weeks before having to open that there, or one of our major water lines was not holding pressure. So we have thousands of feet of water line that's all buried 15 feet in the ground. Somewhere in there is a tiny pinhole leak that's maybe doing one drip per
Mm.
minute. And we had to go find it.
Oh,
And our excavation foreman who was had other jobs. People were calling him, trying to get him off site. And I went out there and literally just stood next to him day after day from 6 in the morning until 8 at night. Like, can I help here? Can I help here? He thought it was a pipsqueak, so get out of here. But I stood there, right, trying to help bridge that gap. And it was, boy, it was desperate because if we didn't get that water main fixed, we wouldn't be able to open the building. And all these renters who were renting the building, what are we going to do with them? And so we worked, and it was hard. But we found the leak, we fixed that problem, got our building all wrapped up. And just a few days before we're about to open, some of the city officials came in and looked at the building and said, there's no way. Like, there's no way you're opening this building. The day of, they brought in half a dozen city inspectors, including the head building official, did a half a day deep dive inspection to every little detail of that building. And at the end, I remember the head building official pulling me aside and said, Mike, I had no hope that you're going to get this done. But looking at what you've actually accomplished, this is the best building that I have ever seen in this city. It's like, oh, thank you. Right. Because
yeah,
this whole time I'm thinking, am I good enough? Can I do what I need to do? Like,
yeah.
right. All those demons inside you really start to question things. And the reality is we start off any task where we're terrible at it. Right. But you have to keep with it, keep pushing forward, keep getting better, because eventually you're going to have that moment and look back and say, I did it. I can actually do this. And so that was
Mm.
such a positive, big moment in my life.
Yeah. How old were you about that time? I mean, you're not that far out of school.
No, I was 25, maybe.
Wow. I mean, and it's so tangible. And what a credible encouragement, because I've spoke many times in the Twin Cities, and you drive through, you see tons of buildings, and now here's this man who says this is one of the best inspections I've ever been through, and of course who's probably a 50 or 60-year-old something,
Yeah.
right, who's been
Yep.
doing it 30, 40 years, and you're like going, man, what a confidence boost for
Mhm.
you.
Yeah. It was so important. And I think the important lesson there is keep with it because eventually you can get to that kind of level.
Yeah,
Um,
let's talk about that resiliency. I mean,
hmm.
I think it's one of the challenges, we're often reminded of some of the quotes, like if people knew how many times they quit when they're just so close, to really getting over the hump, right? And it's a hard thing for perseverance. At the same time, there's a humility in being able to say, hey, maybe I need to let this go, right?
Yeah.
And so knowing when to kind of Kenny Rogers, when to hold them and when to fold them, right?
Yeah.
Um, but as you walk through that and you were learning this along the way, you know, one of the superpowers that was really yours compared to others was this ability for you to solve problems. Did you have team members around that did that as well?
We had a couple at that time. This is still back before we really realized of hiring the best people. And so a lot of things still fell to me, but we had a couple of really good people that were also working with me solving these problems.
Let's talk about those people now. I mean, you you've told me before, man, if I don't have someone who resolves issues,
Mm.
I don't know if they're going to add a lot of value, right? I
Yeah.
mean, tell me what you're looking for when you go after the best in the world.
Boy. So the number one thing is meeting our values. And so we have a number of values, including things like achieving great things, being a genuine human. You'd be shocked at how hard that is to find in construction. Construction is stereotypically a pretty rough and tumble environment.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we want people with experience, but we find it really hard to find someone who has experience who also lines up with something as simple as being a genuine human, being a respectful, caring, kind person that wants to work things out together. Um, so we wrestle a little bit with that, but the best people are great problem solvers, right? They see a bunch of problems coming in, they're able to understand, dig through that, articulate what's going on, and then solve the root issue and then move on to the next thing. As
Mm,
we tackle new big challenges, oftentimes a new challenge means that we actually get worse for a little while because there's a whole new flood of problems that come in.
yeah.
But we look at how fast the problems are coming in compared to how fast we're able to solve those problems. So we need people at that kind of level who can solve a variety of kind of problems within their space. And one other thing we look for is we often say we're looking for people who are fighting to be best in the world at what they do, just like you and your experience, right? And they don't necessarily have to already be world champions at what they do. They've got to be on that journey, right? If they're just here to punch a clock, there's plenty of good places to work. It's just not our place.
Yeah.
If you're here and you have a tenacity and energy to learn and grow and improve as much as you can, then you're in a good spot because you're going to get to that kind of level.
Mm. Yeah, that's so powerful. As I look through that and you start thinking about, hey, how do I hire for that, right? Some real challenges come up because it's hard to prove my tenacity. That mindset over problems is something I'm really eyeing up very closely and watching for, because I've seen a lot of folks that become they don't I don't think they understand their contribution to the organization, being the fact that problem solving is going to be always at the top of the list because if we don't have issues, they probably don't need Trent. Like I'm
Yeah.
probably not needed here. They're hiring me because they've got an issue. I have an ability to solve it and help their team solve it. And that's what we're getting hired for. So if we don't understand like and embrace a chance. And this is why it always freaks me out when people go, oh my gosh, we have another challenge. We have another problem. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm the guy who goes, this is going to be awesome. Like, I'm so excited, right? Because I'm like, there's a challenge, meaning we're going to do something different. It's probably going to be better in the end because it's not working now the way it should. And it's going to work better when we're done. It's going to work perfect. Probably not, but it's going to work better. We're going to get more efficient. We're going to be taxed to do something differently. We're going to grow and learn. I mean, all these benefits that we get from going through these challenges, I love.
Yeah, we often tell our teams that problems are not a fundamental issue. It's not a reflection of us as like a bad company. We have 10,000 problems, but that's intentional because if we had zero problems, that means we're not growing. And so the challenge for the organization is to grow at a rate that we produce enough problems that matches our skill set and ability to solve those problems. But the problems will always exist, and that's intentional.
Mm. Yeah, I got to tell you, one of the things I hate the word, by the way. I think the
Yeah.
word is not fundamentally great for mindset for
Yeah.
people. So, often at Leadershipity, when we go in organizations, one of the first things we do, because we want a language around leadership,
Mm.
and that language is we remove problems. We take it out of the vocabulary, and because if someone comes to me, I mean, as if I come to you, Mike, it's not very encouraging. Like, oh man, Mike, I got a big problem, and you're like, man, I got my own. Like, I got 10,000 over here. Like, I don't need to add one. But in the mindset of the people who really want to get better, they love a challenge.
Yeah.
Oh, Mike, you got a challenge? Oh, let's talk about it. Let's go grab some sandwiches and talk about your challenge because I'm interested. How can I help you resolve your challenge? Because I'm always up for a challenge. Or are we hiking the mountain this weekend? Are we going to bike 100? Are we going to take the kids to the hardest playland in the world and like survive it as dads? What are we going to do? Because I think I'm up for the challenge, but I don't know if I want your problems. So I think there's a very distinct language around that. How do you view that?
Mm. No, I love that. I think language impacts us at an emotional level. And if you can change that and tweak that language so that your initial gut response is more positive, that's such a powerful concept. I love it.
Good. So let's come back to um, you've talked a little bit about. I mean, man, like I said, you consistently have challenges on your docket. It's not like, oh, hey, look, surprise, I woke up and there's a challenge. Um, you go through some challenges are pretty easy, resolved with a phone call. Some are much more diligent. Some are much more challenging you as a person. You can't open this building. You don't have the experience. You're not enough. I mean,
Mm.
that's what they
Yeah.
said to you, right?
Yeah.
And for people that are out there today who are being told, "Hey, listen, I'm not enough. You're not going to be able to go. Oh, you're never going to have the money enough to go to university. You're not smart enough to get through. You're not this." Like, what do you tell those naysayers who are unwilling to have the tenacity um to 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 actually go the distance on it?
What we allow ourselves to think in our mind eventually becomes our reality. And I think
Mm.
what so much of us struggle with, including myself, is that you get into this like language in your mind of, oh, I'm not good enough, or oh, that event back there, I screwed that up. And then you just dwell on the problem, how you failed, how it all screwed up, right? And you become more cautious. You don't want to jump into the next thing because you don't want to fail again. You don't want to put yourself out there. And I think what's really important is as best as you can to see that in your mind and then to let it go and then take action. So every day,
Mm.
wake up and say, what's the next action I'm taking? And what's a magical is you take enough actions and you start to see that that language in your mind starts to diminish because the action you're taking is proving that language wrong. And now there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be more opportunities and challenges that you face, but have the tenacity every day to take that next step and you will get past it in a really powerful way. It A lot of people don't do that. And that's when you start to kind of, not take that energy you should.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to a fellow EO member who
Mm.
wrote up a journal called the Oak Journal. And I've done it in the past. I'm actually doing it right now on a business that we're running in the NIL space. And man, the daily planning of just putting your head down and taking action. This is what I
Yeah.
have to do today. I could look at the bigger problem. I could look at this deadline and panic, even though I'm worried about something that's not going to happen for 3 weeks. Or I can get my list of what I need to do today to move towards that deadline and just get it done,
Yeah.
right? To take that action. And, I think that analysis paralysis. I think fear is paralysis. I think there's a lot of things that creep its way in when we keep our eye off the focus of our daily action.
Yeah, I mean, right now we're faced with a challenge. We're building $100 million building, and it's looking like the building will open and not have power.
Mm.
right? This is terrible. It may not have power for like 6 months. Turns out there's a transformer shortage going on. But anyway, one of the largest utilities in the nation is telling us that we can't buy our own transformer and install it. It's only them. And the deeper reason that is they gain a lot of profit on that. There's a union kind of monopoly on the space. So they're
Mm-hmm.
very closed off. And so it's quite easy to be like, wow, largest utility, we're small in comparison to them. Like, how are we ever going to like, overcome this?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, what are we doing tomorrow? Well, let's reach out to our network to see who we know. Anyway, that led you just kind of going down this path to a point that now we're in talks with the state senator in our state who oversees the Energy Commission. And we're now having talks with the media and people like that. Like, can we gain enough leverage to encourage this energy company to allow us to use our transformer? I don't know if it's going to work out or not, but I just know tomorrow what step I'm taking. And I
Yeah.
just keep doing that over and over again.
Yeah. That's so good. That's so good. And and think about this. I mean, when you saw mom and dad have a smaller company, when you were in school, did you ever see yourself like, you know what I'm going to be doing? I'm going to be doing $100 million projects in like, 15, 20 years. What do you think of that? Did you see that?
I no. I mean, we always had kind of a dream, like, can we make this kind of world impact? But I had no idea we would get to 100 million or beyond that level. But I knew what I was going to do tomorrow, and I knew if I did enough of these steps, I could have that kind of impact.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So let's talk a quick moment about when things are down for you. If things are not going the right direction, things aren't headed your way. Is there a quote you lean on? Anything that kind of says like, "Hey, this kind of rights my ship."
I don't know if I have a particularly magical quote. I kind of remember back to things like going to the moon, right? We
Mm,
choose to go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard.
mm,
And I love that because if you think back to that time, I know the space race was going on, but why did we go to the moon? Fundamentally, because it's freaking awesome to say we went to the moon, right?
yeah,
Like, we're doing it because we want to embrace and take on those challenges. And so that just reminds me like, this is like the life I want. I want to be taking on these challenges. It's going to be hard. That journey is what I'm excited about.
yeah.
So that kind of helps realign myself.
That's awesome. My quote of the day, thinking about us meeting and what you're accomplishing, was, you know, if you build it, he will come. Yeah, I was back to that. Hey, man, you can do it, and I just love it. So, thank you so much. Winners Find a Way show with Mike Kaeding, CEO of Norhart. Man, so excited that you could join us. Thank you, Mike, for everything. Look for us every Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, 9:30 a.m. Pacific on the YouTube live channel, LinkedIn Live, and Facebook Live.
Thanks for having me.